What's going on? CoinTrader is going to look at Avalanche AVAX, AVAX on that ticker right now at 1277 and actually looking like a really nice daily pattern setup over the last week. And one of the reasons specifically is that we have a bottom setting a higher low, running up, and then seeing 3 nice days of inside bars. And then now on the current day, having a nice bullish breakout with a little bit more of that follow through. So just a reiteration, inside bars. So if you can see the previous candle right here, we had a high and a low of the trade. The following day's candle, which actually was bearish, but it fit inside less than half the body. But if you look at the upper end of the wick and the lower shadow, it actually completely fits within the price trading of the day before. And then the following bullish candle actually fits with inside the body of the previous bearish day as well. So each daily range got tighter and tighter and tighter and fit with inside the price range of the previous day. So that's what inside bars actually are. And so we know that that is a consolidation and a continuation pattern. So typically we do look for a bullish or bearish breakout from that. So if the current daily actually found a lower price compared to the previous low on the previous daily candle, that would ultimately be a bearish breakout. So right now, since we are seeing prices well above the previous high of the previous upper wick on that candle, we know that that's a very nice bullish breakout with a lot of great follow through. So even if we look at the volume right now, let's go ahead and scrunch this up. Very nice volume right now as well on the current candle. So that's a very good sign. And then in addition to, we're also seeing a very nice run up above the 26 period EMA. So with less than half an hour, or actually just over half an hour, excuse me, until the current daily candle closes, we are going to look for that as a very nice break and close, especially since, as you can see, back on the 13th of December, when we did run up and we found a big price resistance point right along this 26 before pulling back and finding a lower low now. So still a good sign, especially after running up and breaking this 12 period EMA, basically more or less holding it as support and then seeing that continuation fall through. And so now if we do zoom out, you can see that the last 2 run-ups, when the price did get in between the 26 and the 50, we did find this big zone as resistance where we did get rejection and pulled back. So same thing happened back in the end of October, start of November, saw prices run up, get rejected from this 50, and then pulled back to see continuation where we found resistance once again on the 12 and 26 periods. So now next thing that's extremely bullish that I want to talk about on this daily chart too is you can see that we actually have an extremely strong price level of resistance that was found at 1212. So on the current 3 candles that we just broke, big resistance as well as big resistance on this big flush after we saw a pullback and retracement below this level once we actually smashed it on the 15th of December. Because if we do look left, we can see it as 1 test, 2 tests, 3 tests, 4 tests, and 5 tests on this overall support line before ultimately breaking it and finding our low, which right now is at 1054 for AVAX. So the fact that now we are finding a lot of great support on top of this big price level, which is extremely relevant and significant, has been proven by both big points of resistance and support, is a little bit more of that upside direction and positivity that we're likely going to see another run up. So next run up is going to come right around the $14 level. And then above that, we would be looking at about just shy of $14.40. So that is where we found our previous resistance zone before. And also right now in that instance, that will be a big point of also resistance too, because that will still be inside of the 50 period EMA, which means we know that this is going to be a big resistive point. So that is going to be the challenge for the bulls. Let's actually clean this up here. So that is going to be the big challenge for the bulls right now, is to run up, test this level. Likely in that instance, we will start getting overextended conditions for a lot of other cryptos. We're tracing and then hoping to find this 1212 as support once again. So that ultimately is what we would love to see. Now, for example, if we actually do pull up a Fibonacci extension and we do find about 414 or so is going to be the resistive point, then you can see that right now we would be looking at a retracement down to 61.8 sitting right at the 12, which would be where that point would be coming in, actually just above that. But additionally, if we actually look up overhead too, and also to the left, there's a big point of resistance that we haven't talked about yet coming in right at 1317, which was big resistance just after we had the big FTX flush. So if we do run up to about 1440 or so, or even right around 14 even, we could see that as a very nice opportunity for a retracement and a pullback at that level. So plenty of downside supports if we can run up that high. And my apologies, actually, we are currently in the 2-day chart. I just realized, not the 1 day. So looking at the 1 day, it's actually extremely bullish too, because we're actually seeing the first amount of price action above the 50 period EMA as well that we haven't seen since before the big FTX pullback and flush. So especially since the last 2 times we've gotten stuck up at this big resistance point in between the 26 and the 50. Now looking at a lot of nice upside, especially after zooming in on this pattern, holding the 12 period as very nice level of closing support. And so especially with less than half an hour right now until the time of close, it's looking a little favorable right now that we will get this nice bullish close on top of the 50 period EMA. Now, I do want to actually flip over into the weekly, because one of the big things that I want to talk about is that we're actually looking at a very big descending wedge right now, falling wedge. So if we take this overall price level, you can see that we're starting to look like we're about to break bullish out of it, since we are actually now seeing the current weekly outside of the previous range based on the resistance points for this wedge. So resistance point, which also came in right at the 12 period EMA, and also resistance point right at the 12 period EMA. So the fact that we're actually approaching the 12 period right now might be another sign that even since we are breaking out, we could still see a back test, hopefully confirming this ascending triangle or descending triangle, previous resistance line as now support before finding another upside run. So that's likely what I'm actually expecting right now, since we know that the 12 period is going to be extremely strong. And also a lot of the other cryptos are due for a little bit of a shorter term retracement right now. So that is the overall expectation. Now with that, I actually do want to flip over into the log scale and talk about this chart as well, because you can see that overall we're actually forming a little bit longer of a pattern. So let's actually look at a little bit more of a resistance line to the downside. And then we've also got a very big extension. So if we look at this as being the bottom side of a wedge, we actually can draw it out to previous resistance points prior to reaching the all-time high. So back in February of last year, resistance point, and then ultimately ended up seeing it flip as big point of support, and then ultimately again now finding it as support and support. So still looking like a big opportunity to hold this big line that was a resistance previously. So the opportunity is pretty huge if we can get a lot of that confirmation that this bullish break from the falling triangle or the falling wedge is actually going to be looking like a lot more bullish opportunity. Now, in addition to that, if we actually look at the volume for this chart on the weekly, you can see that pretty much we had our huge pullback, which lasted many months consecutively with huge increasing of bearish volume. So after that, we know that that was pretty much the max strength to the downside. And ever since, we have just been gotten a tapering off of all volume. So even bullish volume has been falling. And typically when we do have decreasing volume in a continuation pattern, we likely know that that does increase the odds of the directional breakout being a little bit more favorable for the expected direction, which right now is still bullish to the upside. And so one of the main reasons for that is that you can see that decreased volume means decreased selling pressure, but yet prices are still going down, showing a lack of strength in this move. So when people actually see this pattern playing out, especially with this low volume, that creates a lot more optimism about the breakout for that expected direction. And that's what actually pushes people into this space and ends up buying those breakout moves. Now, obviously, since this is the weekly chart, that does mean it will still take a little bit longer to play out, since it's not going to be an overnight move. And obviously, we still have plenty of other factors in the rest of the crypto space to consider. But one of the other really big signs that I want to look at is pretty much just this extremely long-term base of support that comes in right above the $10 psychological line. Because as you can see, we pretty much kicked off right above that. And then looking left all the way to the summer of 2021, that's where we found a lot of closing support before running up to the all-time high. And so the fact that we've backtested this, have still maintained it as support, and also seen decreasing volume, does mean that this support level has been strengthening and is actually a lot more likely to end up holding, since what will really make a big impact would be bouncing off resistances and then seeing increasing volume as we do smash this to the downside to create a little bit more lower lows. And personally, I don't think that's really the expectation right now, so I would be surprised in the short term anyway if we do see a break in the coming weeks and months of this 10 to 1050 zone. And so now I actually want to pull up the RSI and look at that along with the stochastic RSI. So if we actually look at the RSI first, you can see that we have bottomed out and actually overextended on the big pullback that we found in the summer of 2020 back in June 2022, excuse me. And so for the RSI, we actually got down to 29.47 on the weekly, which if we look at the low, that's actually going to come in at a low of 1371. And then so we have set higher lows for this RSI. And so when we did find our low bouncing off just above 1050 at 1054, we were looking at an RSI of 32.76. So we're actually seeing lower lows in price, higher lows in RSI does mean a lot more of that bullish divergence, which especially on the weekly chart, 2 of those points is a lot better of that data signal. Now, in addition, let's actually look at the stochastic RSI. And if you're not familiar with the stochastic RSI, this is just the relative strength index of the stochastic oscillator, which is essentially just kind of similar to a MACD, if you will. And I actually like this as a much better indicator as opposed to the MACD, just because it's a little bit quicker and not as laggy, and also a little bit more reliable in my experience and such. So it functions typically the same way, where we do have our upper line and our lower line, and anything above or below typically does mean overextended or oversold. And as you can see on this big pullback, we actually had an extremely low RSI smashed all the way against the 0 line. And so any of that big bullish cross does indicate more upside, which is when we saw this little move to the upside, testing the 12-period EMA. And then after that topped out and flipped, you can see that we did have a bearish cross when we did have this RSI now run to the downside. So we're actually looking at a couple of periods of upside based on the most recent bullish cross. But we could still have another oscillating period where the RSI for the stochastic does still get stuck up, if in fact the 12-period EMA on this weekly does end up holding. Flipping over and looking at the 4-hour now before we wrap up, actually looking like a little bit of a temporary top's going to be coming in, because let's actually turn back on the volume. You can see we've already hit our big volume peak compared to when we had a decrease, but yet higher high in price. So with this big upper wick on this candle, it's actually looking like we are due for a little bit of consolidation retracement, allowing these EMAs to actually catch up. So I expect that probably the biggest run right now that we'll see for a few bars anyway has already been in. So no real expectations in the short term right now. And so even if we do look at the RSI in the short term, still looking at plenty of tests of overbought. And so now we are likely going to be looking at a little bit more of that consolidation and continuation pattern. So it is where we are at and what we're looking at coming into the rest of the week for AVAX Avalanche. That is going to wrap up the show for us today. If you haven't done so just yet, would appreciate you hitting those thumbs up, like, and subscribe buttons. And also, if you do have any questions, comments, definitely drop a note down in the section below. Love getting back to each and every one of you. Do appreciate all the continued love and support. As always, means so much. Stay safe, take care, and I'll catch you back in the next video.